Imagine for a moment that you have discipline and creativity within your framework of reality, meaning, are you in a cage? Are you in prison? Are you physically immobile? Within your framework of reality, do you think it is possible that in 5 years you could be in a 10 times more intelligent reality, meaning a reality that has 10 times more units of well-being per unit of energy invested, the definition of intelligence? Does that seem probable or possible? And let's start with possible. Is it possible that if you made the right choices, that you could be in a 10 times better reality? And the next thing is, do you know what those right choices are? Meaning, do you need to go to the library? Do you need to find a mentor to find out? Or do you pretty much already know what those choices are? And most people, when they look closely at their reality, if I look closely at my reality, I have to conclude that I know what to do, one, and that there's not all that many people stopping me from doing it, two, to create a 10 times more valuable reality, a 10 times more intelligent reality, where the well-being I create for myself, those I care about, and the planet is 10 times bigger than the present day. And the question then becomes, why won't I do that? Meaning 98, 99% of human beings will not create a 10 times more intelligent reality in the next 5 years, despite no one stopping them. And one of the answers is identity. And identity is a habit. It is a habit of thinking, feeling, acting, and speaking. Speaking is another form of action, and it's another form of thinking. But these 4 habits combine to create an identity. And we have an identity if we work, we have an identity at work. If we have a friend, we have an identity that's with that friend that's a little bit different than our identity. Our habits are contextual. When we're out in nature alone, we behave differently than when we're in a party. We think differently. We feel differently. If we speak differently. And so it's an interesting thing to understand that our identity is both our greatest ally as a habit or pattern of engaging with reality and creating reality, and it's also our biggest limitation. And one of the reasons that we will not change in the next 5 years in a dramatic 10-fold increase is that in order to change, we would need to change our identity. We would need to change what we say, what we do, which would in turn affect how we feel, and what we think. We would need to change our sense of who we are at an identity level. And change exposes us to the unknown. And in exposing ourselves to the unknown, it exposes us to our fear. And all fear is fear of pain in the past repeating itself in the future. And the more pain there was in the past that we did not know how to resolve, the more frightened we are of the unknown, because the unknown includes the possibility of encountering that pain again, or more pain, or different pain. And when we have experienced high levels of traumatic pain in the past that has not been adequately resolved, and by adequately resolved, what I mean is, A, we understood why the pain was created. B, we understood how the pain was created. C, we understood our role in that pain. D, we understand the biology of trauma. E, we understand what to do to not do that again. And F, we believe in a future that is primarily positive. And G, that we made the changes and have some degree of confidence based on experience that we know what we're doing. That particular set of steps transforms the fear of the pain in the past into excitement and anticipation for a positive future. But if we experience traumatic levels of pain in the past, either in infancy or in childhood, or we witnessed other people close to us, and we concluded, I have no idea what to do about this, I therefore have no reason to believe that it would be different in the future. And if I saw someone close to me being traumatically abused, I have no idea why it wouldn't be me next time. In that kind of environment, we project uncertainty with its fear of change, with its fear of the unknown, into the future. And we will not change our identity because we are afraid of the unknown. And to the degree that we are traumatized, to the degree that we feel overwhelmed and traumatized and uncertain about our survival, is often to the degree that we will cling to what is most familiar. And what is most familiar to a traumatized or abused individual is the abuse identity. And in very much a devil you know is better than the devil you don't know type of dynamic, you will cling to the devil you know. And we see this starting in children, when children may run away, for example, to escape the abuser. But the abuser that begins in the face of the parent or the teacher or the older brother is projected out into the rest of the world. So when you grow up in an abusive household or culture, you anticipate that the rest of the world is like your world. You project it out there. So you project abusive culture and family system out in the world. The one variable is it is an unknown abusive and family system, and therefore you prefer to stay in the abusive relationship you're in which you are obviously surviving. You're not dead. And so there you are. So you prefer to hang on to that. And thus comes the attachment to who we are, the attachment to our identity whether or not it is pleasant. We may spend 60% of our thoughts worrying and frightened, so that's not particularly pleasant. We may spend 60% of our energy avoiding and managing fears, again, not particularly pleasant. So our feelings, our thoughts, our behaviors are not terribly visionary or pleasant, and yet we cling to them as known phenomena. And I want to look at a couple of peripheral equations or central equations around this whole topic of identity. So one of them is that every identity is an interface between the environment and human need. Human need to survive, feel secure, feel love and belonging, have a sense of self-esteem, develop one's gifts, bring those gifts into the world, create abundance, and transcend the limited sense of self to be a part of something bigger. Those are our human needs. And they're in a hierarchy. So the first thing that you focus on is survival. And you don't worry about discovering your gifts if you're not surviving. You focus on survival. Once you've got survival, you focus on security. So there's a hierarchy. And every identity is good for surviving in one environment and bad for surviving in another. And that's why identities are context specific. The identity that will keep you free from being raped in prison, for example, is a different identity than the identity that will help you be a great painter, which is different again from the identity that will help you be popular in an American high school, which is different than the identity that will help you be popular in a Filipino high school. And so every single identity is geared towards meeting human needs in a specific environment. And every identity that is good and will do that in one environment will fail in another environment, and vice versa. If you have an identity that is causing your survival or your cult ranking to go down, and you bring that same identity into a different environment, that same identity will help you go up. You can think of speaking English. If you're in China and you speak English, it's probably not a great example because so many of them are learning English, but okay, if you're in Thailand and you are learning English, it's not a very good identity for survival. Learning Thai would be better. But if you take that identity and move it over to the United Kingdom, suddenly that same identity, the English language speaking identity, will help you survive and feel secure and have a sense of love and belonging and self-esteem in that environment. And so this leads to an extrapolation that says if you like an identity that's being punished in the environment that you're in, take it to another environment that is capable of honoring it, one. Or, if you are stuck or unwilling to leave your environment, develop an identity, a habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing, that will help you succeed in the location in which you are in. And you can also, in that kind of trumping of identity, think of rock, paper, and scissors. That that the rock can bang the scissors, the paper can cover the rock, and the scissors can cut the paper. And so you have this same kind of dynamic in identity that depending on the location or the pairing, depending on the pairing of environment and habits, Some habits allow you to climb a given environment, and other habits kind of lose rank and you descend in those environments. Very quickly reiterating a little bit of what I've just said in kind of a more succinct equation, need for certainty equals need for control equals alignment with dominant mass. Now, why would the need for certainty or control equal aligning with a dominant mass, which in turn equals alignment with an alpha personality or group, or the culture, which is the culture is usually the most dominant force, particularly in a traumatized people. And the reason for that is the more traumatized the people, the more afraid of the unknown the people are. And so the more they will cling to familiarity. And culture is at its core a set of memes that provide familiarity and certainty because everyone agrees to abide and adopt the cult or the culture. Cultures are not often very intelligent, meaning you can take most cultures and you could look at them and say, you know, if rather than eating fast food, you ate this diet, you'd be less obese as a culture. Now, no one would deny that. So why is everyone going to fast food and eating sugar and milk and all that? Well, because everyone's doing it. Similarly, drinking is far more toxic than many drugs, including marijuana. And so why would you legalize and everyone drink and not do this other thing? Well, it's cultural. The British government hired a statistician, hoping to give evidence for the basis of banning one of the illegal drugs, and the statistician said that you were 300 times more likely to get injured from horseback riding than you were using this illegal drug. And so they were promptly fired as a statistician because cults focus on maintaining the status quo. They don't focus on the most intelligent response to data because the primary purpose of a cult is to provide a sense of stability and certainty. It is not to provide the path to the greatest form of intelligence or data orientation or truth. Cults lie all the time. Cults are profoundly dogmatic because that's their service. Their goal is to say, things are going to stay the same, don't worry about it, nothing's going to change. Oh, thank heavens. They don't say we are the most intelligent response to this and this situation, because that would be data analysis. And so cults have relatively little to do with intelligence, other than that in a traumatized population, there is a need for familiarity and certainty to avoid feeling terrified of the unknown. And that need may be stronger than intelligence, meaning a traumatized group of people that's anxious may say, we don't care what is the most intelligent thing for us to do. We want to calm down. And it seems like the best thing to do is for everyone to do the same thing and agree to look in the same way and say, how are you? I'm fine, even though they're not, and even though you don't really want to know how they are. And we're just going to do these things because that's what we do. And we feel so relieved because we're all playing our role, in this dumbed down version called cult or culture. So the need for certainty and the need for control leads to alignment with an alpha or a cult or culture because they are stable. Because the law of mass says that whenever a small object encounters a large object, the small object deflects and changes, and the large object continues largely on its original course. If a bowling ball interacts with a pinball, and they both hit each other, the pinball bounces off and the bowling ball continues in its original course. And the reason for that is the bowling ball is bigger. And so if you want a stable identity to give you a sense of control, to combat the helplessness and terror of trauma, you will want to form an identity in response to a large, stable object in your environment. And culture and alpha groups, power groups, the police, the military, the government, provide that protection. So you don't have to obey the law. Many laws are patently insane based on the data, doing the exact opposite of what they say they're going to do. And you could just say, well, we've got good laws and idiotic laws. I will create my own culture. This creates a great deal of hostility in people that are uncomfortable with change and in the unknown. And in a sociopathic cult, where your government will use your tax dollars to come and kill you or lock you up or intimidate you or take away your job if you don't obey every law, regardless of the intelligence of the law. Because remember, cults are not accountable to intelligence. They're ultimately accountable to providing stability and help its people protect themselves from the fear of the unknown. And so when we create an identity in reference to the largest object in our environment, our culture or the dominant power group, this could be nature, of course. If we're out in nature, the dominant culture is nature. So if you want a stable environment, you have to abide and attune it to the laws of nature. It's no good creating an identity based on the hypothesis that you can walk through trees if every few minutes, as you attempt this, you bang into trees. You've now got a helpless identity. You say, I am mind over matter. I'm going to walk through trees. That's my identity. And you walk into one and you fail. And this shakes the identity. It's like, it's very hard to be confident in an identity that's being battered by the dominant forces around you. And so, again, the need for certainty, which correlates to the amount of traumatic history, dictates that we build our identities in relationship to the largest objects around us. Now, one of the things that cults are is a paradigm. For example, a capitalist cult has a paradigm that it's a good idea to turn money into more money. And also in most of our capitalist cults today have ranking systems where the more money you are, the more important you are. And so once you have a paradigm like we are a capitalist cult, now you have a hierarchy of values, and things like capital or the skill to turn capital into more capital become high in the hierarchy of values. And we don't say that we're an artist cult. We say we're a capitalist cult. So if you create art in a capitalist cult, it's only high ranking if it creates capital. Well, then it's important, not because the art is important, but because capital is important. And so the art makes money and is important because of its link to the paradigm and to the hierarchy of values within the cults. And protection from the unknown equals normalcy. So the more you want to protect yourself from the unknown, culturally or individually, the more you will try and behave normally. Because normally, if you add up 2 plus 2, it equals 4. And you add it up again, 2 plus 2 and equals 4. So if you want certainty and to know what's coming, just keep adding up 2 plus 2 and you'll keep getting 4, and it'll be very reassuring. If every time you do, 2 plus 6, well, it doesn't equal 4. If every single equation you do is a new number, you'll learn a lot more about mathematics, but at the same time, you'll lose a certain sense of predictability. There'll be more wonder and discovery, but wonder and discovery with an abusive history becomes terror and dread. And when you have a hierarchy of values within a cult paradigm, you now have very low-ranking traits and values, and you have very high-ranking traits and values. And there is a fear from the intersection of our human needs to survive, feel secure, etc., of shame and exclusion. And there is a desire for money, power, and appearance, which all happen to be very highly ranked in Western cults. So money, power, appearance. The ability to frighten other people and make them do what you want is one form of power. Freedom is another form of power. I can do what I want. Appearance, looking good within the cult's hierarchy of values, another form of high rank. Everyone wants to look good in our cult. And then money is a way to look good and is a way to have power and is highly referenced and relevant within a capitalist paradigm. And so, so if you want to fit in, if you want to meet your human needs to survive, feel secure, have a sense of love and belonging, for example, then you would want to behave in a way that gets more money, behave in a way that gains more power and freedom, and behave in a way that makes you look good, which includes having more money, having more freedom, etc., because those are central to the cult. And it's this intersection between our needs and the cult that shapes an identity. And history and our relationship to history is part of an identity in that it is part of the environment. It is part of the psychological environment of a family. For example, if you have deep poverty in your family, in a capitalist cult, you will have shame and exclusion because in a capitalist cult, part of your value is determined by how much money you have. So if you have very little money in your family's history, you have a sense of shame, the sense of being excluded and unwanted and unvaluable in your cult. And fear of shame and exclusion is fear of not meeting one's human needs. Because when one is excluded or shamed, one is less likely to survive, feel secure, and have a sense of love and belonging. How do you have a sense of love and belonging if you are excluded and considered not valuable? It's difficult. And again, whatever it is you're doing, for example, you might be a farmer creating healthy organic soil. In a capitalist cult where farmers don't make a lot of money, you would be unimportant. But if you were in an ecological cult, which was all about bringing health and vitality to human beings and the planet, you would be right up there in kind of, at the pinnacle of the cult's hierarchy of values, and you would have high ranking, whereas some banker who comes along and says, I can help you make a lot of paper I can turn this paper into this paper if you will spray chemicals on your land and destroy the soil. They'd say, get the fuck out of here. We don't need you. We're trying to build ecological sustainability and health in our bodies. We're not trying to turn bits of paper into bits of paper. Who gave you that idea? I mean, get out of here and come back when you're willing to pick up a hoe and do some organic farming. And, so suddenly the banker, their identity would collapse in that environment, because it's not like banking is terribly fun. So why do bankers sign up to be bankers? Because in a capitalist cult, they're high ranking. And so if their goal was to be high ranking, now that they're in an ecological cult rather than a capitalist cult, they would, you're absolutely right. It is rather bizarre focusing on turning this number of digits into this number of digits. I'll go get a hoe and try and earn my rank within the new paradigm based on the new position. Now, sensitivity comes in here biologically and neurologically. 10 to 20% of the population of several mammalian groups, including human beings, are more sensitive than the others. One. Number two, the more sensitive one is, the less you enjoy conflict with non-sensitives, which is the vast majority of people. 80 to 90% of people are not as sensitive. So imagine if you were doing karate and every time someone hit you, you felt 3 times more pain than every time you hit them, than your opponent. So they hit you, you're in massive amounts of pain. You hit them, they're in an average amount of pain. They're in 3 times less pain. Well, one of the key metrics in who survives a conflict is pain tolerance. The higher your pain tolerance, the more likely you are to survive a conflict. The higher your fear tolerance, the higher your pain tolerance, the higher your discomfort tolerance, the longer you're willing to wait out someone, the more likely you are to win a conflict. Now, in a cult that is not very aware of who is and is not sensitive, but that contains at least 10% of sensitives, one of the consequences of being born in a sensitive state, and you can find this out very quickly, do the HSP test, highly sensitive person test. It gets you within 80% of the ballpark there, and from there you could do additional research if you want, and read a book like on Quiet, called Quiet, or the highly sensitive person, and kind of learn and explore that terrain. But it's an important part of identity because it's a fundamental in the environment. Your body is part of your environment, which means it shapes your identity. Male and female, of course, shapes your identity as well. But sensitivity in male or female is a very important part of this process. A sensitive person will experience more pain and conflict, which means they will be more conflict averse than not. And it's not a lot of fun to get into conflicts that you lose most of the time because your pain tolerance is quite low relative to the other person. And pain fatigues us. If I start whipping you and beating you and then tell you to think and do a hard day's work, a lot of your energy is going to be spent distracting yourself from pain and pain management, or just exhaustion after all that, suffering and repair of the pain. And so it's for this reason, a sensitive person is going to be less willing to go head to head, because they're going to lose, because they're going to experience more pain. A sensitive may also be more empathetic. And an empath will be aware of their opponent's pain as well, and so they may not enjoy conflict for that either. It's not like they enjoy winning, because they understand what the other person is going through more than average, because they go through that every time they lose, and they lose a lot. And so there's a lot of empathy in that dynamic. Now, this is important to understand, because it means, and it suggests, if we extrapolate the equation out, that sensitive people will be more adaptive to avoid conflict than non-sensitive people in a sociopathic environment. Meaning, in a sociopathic environment, you have large masses of energy, individuals, groups, armies, dictators, churches. You have large groups of masses of energy that are going to do whatever is most expedient. That's what a sociopathic protocol dictates, is you do whatever is most expedient without any regard for the pain of the other. And this is, of course, highly dangerous to an empath, to a sensitive. And so in a sociopathic environment, a sensitive will adapt their identity to be in harmony with the dominant sociopathic force, if that is necessary to survive. And so, you can think of the abused sensitive woman who, when the abuser shouts, or you can think of the battered sensitive husband, when the bullying alpha female shouts, who just wants to get away from the pain and doesn't want to argue, because there's kind of a dynamic. As sensitives behave that way, they also often give off a vibe that you can bully them into doing just about anything. And so this is also part of identity. It can be a sense of victimhood and powerlessness for sensitives in a sociopathic environment, because there's the feeling, I can't survive a head-on collision because the pain would be too much. I'm bullied more than average because of that. And I'm not respected because of that, because in a sociopathic environment, what is respected is the capacity to cause harm. And someone who will not get into a conflict is not going to cause harm. And so they have little relevance. They are ignored. They are not respected and taken into account. And so the more sociopathic the power structure, the more sensitives will be both exploited, need to adapt, and be dishonored. This also, of course, has impact in the larger evolution of the species, because sensitives in an empathic and healthy framework are the ones who see and can tell the truth and understand patterns more than the other 80-90%. And so the 80 to 90% benefit more from a basis of pure intelligence by elevating the role of sensitives to artists, advisors, engineers, designers that understand detail and nuance in both politics and stuff more than someone in a sociopathic state or someone who is less sensitive. The history of a country and the history of a family, of course, has impact in creating the present moment, which has impact on our identity. Energy that has not been recognized does not, for example, if you have a sexual abuse pattern in a household, this sexual abuse pattern will tend to continue until it is brought fully to light and confronted. And the pattern of suppressing information, of secrecy, to avoid stigmatization and shame, and this pattern of suppressing information also has impact and consumes energy and requires a fear-based identity because you do not spend energy to suppress information unless you are afraid, because it takes energy. And it's much easier to tell the truth. And you also cannot be loved and deeply connect without telling the truth. So for any individual or culture to give up love and spend energy to do so and not be seen and respected and honored, in order to pay those very high prices, there has to be a fear related to survival and security and fitting into the cult that is worth paying that price. And the act of suppressing information and keeping secrets is an expression of that fear, which is an expression of the belief that the environment on the outside is sociopathic. If the environment on the outside is intelligent, loving, and empathic, it pays to be completely and fully transparent. Now, the family role and the cult role also plays a very important part in the formation of identity. And a good way to look at it is, for example, if a family needs a hero, if a family needs an entertainer, if a family needs a scapegoat to carry all of the unpalatable shadow aspects of the whole family, if the family needs someone to bully, to vent all its hostility on, and that could be the scapegoat as well, then the roles are set within the level of consciousness and the paradigm within the family. If the paradigm of the family is we have secrets and shames and stuff that we have got to hide and suppress at all costs, so we don't talk about them, and this creates pain and energy and like that, so then we need an entertainer to distract us from that pain and cheer us up, and then we need someone who will lie and please the parents so that it calms them down and they won't abuse us. And then we need a scapegoat so that when the underbelly of the family system does come to light, we can all blame it on them and say it has nothing to do with us. And in this way, the family system survives. And so we have our roles defined. The identity is a set of habits, and habits tie in with roles. If you are an engineer and you go to work every day and do engineering in whatever field, then your identity is of an engineer because you have a habit that when I'm in my engineering role, I think like this, I talk like this, I do this, and I feel this. So I've got my identity as an engineer. And so there is a connection between the family roles and the identities of the people in the family. And there's a connection between the cult roles and the identities of those in the cult. And this is very important to understand because if you think, for example, of the role of a sexual healer, someone who, let's say the role is an older woman or an older man whose specific job is to take uncertain, somewhat traumatized, emotionally illiterate, traumatically illiterate, relationally illiterate teens and help them learn about their bodies and help them develop and cultivate their sexuality before the teens have sex with someone in their peer group who doesn't know what they're doing and in an abuse cult is likely to abuse them. Now, if we create that role, then you can have an identity that plays the role. But in a shame-based cult, this role is taboo. And so no one has at least an honored identity in that role, because we would call that sexual abuse. Meaning if if a 40 or 50 or 60-year-old woman helped a boy in a systematic way at age 13, 14, 15, whatever, whenever the boy was ready, if that was part of the mindset of the cult, where the boy would say, whenever I start getting interested in sexuality, I will pick an older person in a sexual education role that I feel safe with and I like, and I will go through this protocol of learning about the sensations that happen in my body, becoming emotionally present to what I feel in different states of sexuality, learning the different sexual positions, developing and learning about my inner feminine and my inner masculine, so that I have a sense of which parts of me I want to externalize in the choice of lovers, and learning about things like what's my attachment template, and what's my level of sensitivity. How do I tend to feel after an orgasm? Do I need to be cuddled for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour? What is the ideal me in sexuality? And someone that I feel comfortable with plays that role. If I stop feeling comfortable with, then I pick someone else who's in that same role. Well, if a cult creates such a role, and please understand, this is one of more than 1 million distinct roles. Meaning there are 1 million roles that our cult doesn't even have kind of in its sights. What do you mean? I've never heard of that. You're right. There are more than 1 million roles that no one in a given cult has ever heard of. Because, well, how would that help them make more money? The economy is not going to grow if people understand that hairspray is not the most important part of sex, because they've already studied their sexuality, and they noticed that their greatest orgasm had nothing to do with what hair product they were using. Lo and behold, people are going to stop fussing around, buying all these, ridiculous things that the advertisers are trying to say. Buy these shoes and you will have a great orgasm, is kind of the linear logic of having attractive people wear the shoes and smile at you suggestively and all that. Like, buy these shoes and you too will presumably have sex with the person in the ad. The body gets that message and so wants the shoes, but it is, of course, a lie. And the mind would say, no, this is ridiculous. If you had a sexual education, and we can't have the economy damaged by telling people the truth about what products they do and don't need and things like that. So the thing to understand is that particularly when we need to belong as core human need, 1, and 2, in a cult that has a very limited set of roles, we will try and fit a role that our cult has. That's the default mode. I don't want to be unusual. I don't want to go to jail. I don't want everyone talking to me and saying, did you hear? they did something different over there. That parent actually told their children about their genitals. Amazing. We don't do that in this family. We wait for people to get confused and get pregnant by accident. That's the kind of thing we do around here. And so the cult role and its sophistication, or the cult pantheon of roles, determines what identity is available to be taken. And this is particularly the case if there is a high fear of trauma or exclusion or shame if you are not normal. If you're in a cult that will punish you for being abnormal, and certainly locking you up and doing all these various things is pretty high punishment and traumatize you, then you will tend to stick with the cult norms. And soul is a part of identity, meaning every single human being has a certain thing that wakes them up, that causes them to sing, that brings them alive, a certain arena within the psyche that they are more gifted than others, that they're more motivated around than others, that they're more capable and want to do. They're just attracted to that area. It's something unique about the individual. And so the soul will try and call us to a certain extent. It is a role in identity, but what happens is the soul calls us directly to kind of the ultimate expression of our individuality. And then our egos look around and say, well, what's closest to that? I mean, I feel like singing and I feel like this, but there's no role for that, so I'm not going to do that. I'll be a painter. There's painters in this cult. Now, they're not very important, of course, because they don't make money, but I will do that. Or I want to be a teacher, and my soul would kind of call me towards esoteric teaching or teaching about ecological design. But there's no jobs in my town for ecological design. So if I want to be a teacher, it's teaching K through 12 or whatever that's in this design. And so you kind of get the sense that the template for following one's calling, so to speak, takes us into kind of the limited terrain of the roles available in the cult. And there are a couple of consequences to all this, and I've covered a little bit of this, but let's just kind of summarize here also. So clinging to traumatic identity in traumatic cults is one consequence. Stabilizing in low states that can be controlled in traumatic or abuse cults is another consequence. Now, we see this in teenagers in the United States, for example, where it's almost as if they practice being uncommunicative, mildly hostile, bored, and unhappy. Leave me alone. I'm bored. Don't, I did nothing. Whatever that state is, whatever you'd call that, it's a relatively low state. We're not talking excitement. We're not talking joy. We're not talking pleasure. It's leave me alone. Nothing happened. I'm not going to show you who I am, and I'm not enjoying life, and go away. So, that's a pretty low state on the continuum of well-being. And so the question is, why would a teenager prefer that identity to things being wonderful one day and then bad the next day and going up and down? And this comes from the fact that when one is in pain, the difference about being helpless or in control of that pain is a big deal. Meaning one of the worst human states is to feel high levels of trauma and feel like you have no control over it. And so one of the things that a teenager is doing in an abuse cult is they can't stop from being knocked down because their parents, their teachers, their school and all can knock them down, and if not, their government and military can knock them down. They can't stop from being knocked down, which makes them feel helpless. But what reminds them of that helplessness is then when a nice opportunity comes along and they go up, then they get knocked down again. And they realize, I don't have any control. If I go up, I can be knocked down. But then they discover that if I stay down, no one can knock me up. No one can force me to enjoy myself. They can force me to suffer, meaning I'm happily watching TV and Dad comes in shouting. I can't ignore Dad shouting. I'd like to be able to, but I can't, so he knocks me down. But if I stay down and Dad comes in and says, hello, would you like some French toast? I can say, I can stay down. He can't make me go up. And so now I've got control. And what this does is it minimizes the sense of volatility. So stabilizing in a low state that can be controlled is a consequence of a volatile abuse environment. Covert equals indirect equals adaptive equals survival in a sociopathic environment. Secrets equals shame, trauma in the environment, meaning if there's no shame and trauma in the environment, you don't have or keep secrets. And the other important thing is that abuse equals the level of intelligence in the environment. A highly intelligent environment does not abuse its children, does not abuse one another, and does not induce sociopathic traumatic states. So the degree to which abuse and or trauma is prevalent in the bodies, in the minds, and in the environment of a cult or group of people is a measure, a very key measure for the amount of competency and intelligence, which is synonymous with love. Because if you love enough to care, and you care enough to see, and you see enough to understand, and you understand enough to empathize, and you empathize enough to attune, you develop a competent win-win rapport with what you're attuning to. And when you succeed in developing a win-win rapport with what you're attuning to, when you succeed, then you then proceed to create value, to create safety, security, pleasure, to meet needs, which is fun, which leads to a feeling of safety, which leads to joy, which leads to gratitude, and leads back to love. Meaning, if you treat someone competently in a way that engenders large amounts of stable well-being for them, they will love you. Love is a natural synergy to competent, trustworthy caring. It's that simple. So if you have a lot of love in a child or teenager, etc., it means you've got a very high level of competency in the grown-ups around. So, and this correlates to intelligence. Intelligence is the efficiency with which well-being is generated. So per unit of energy, which could be a unit of time, a unit of money, a unit of natural resources, per unit of energy, how much sustainable well-being is created for how many people and how long does it last? That's the measure of intelligence, because that's the measure of competence. If you have competence, and you will do the math. And all human beings want to feel good. All human beings do not want to feel bad. That is innate. The difference is competency or intelligence. And competency and love are synonymous because competency leads to more well-being, which leads to love. And love leads to care, leads to giving a damn, learning, making an effort, and becoming competent.